Hey guys, welcome back to the BFS Fishing Channel. In this video, we're going to be going over some modifications that you can make to your 2022 Shimano Aldebaran BFS. All right, so the first modification we're going to talk about for your 2022 Aldebaran is going to be basically to swap or upgrade the bushing located on the worm shaft. So this is going to be the worm gear bushing, and I've got it right here, and I've already done the modification. And basically this is a quality of life modification. So it doesn't allow the reel to cast any further or, break any better. Basically what it does is it reduces the resistance of the handle so that it feels even smoother than it already does on retrieve. So you can see there that, the handle rotates quite freely. Prior to that, with the bushing in, it would feel kind of like there was a good amount of resistance there. So replacing that with the Roro 742 BFS bearing actually made a big difference in terms of the smoothness of the reel handle. And I'll actually show you guys how to do that in another video. In that video, I'm just going to be doing a tear down, some maintenance, and then I'll show you exactly how to get to this worm gear bearing or bushing. Okay, so 742 BFS Roro bearing, it's a pretty standard size. It's just a 4mm inner bore by 7mm outer diameter by 2.5 width bearing that you need to get. And I do recommend this bearing over other bearings. Okay, so the next modification is this, and this is the KKR, I believe it's the S26 spool specifically made for the Aldebaran. You can find this on AliExpress, and what the manufacturer is claiming is that this spool comes in at a weight of 3 grams. So what's really impressive about this spool is that the manufacturer claim is actually true. So they are able to get this weight by making it a shaftless spool design, but by also making the spool really, really lightweight itself. It is an aluminum alloy. I don't know exactly which alloy. Okay, so let's go ahead and weigh this, and we'll show you that this spool actually does come in at 3 grams exactly. That's really impressive, because there is one other spool that's being sold for the Aldebaran, and that is a spool made by a company called Avail, and their weight comes in at about 4.7 grams. The stock spool comes in at about 6.7 grams. So this is only 3 grams. That's crazy. It makes me feel like I need to take really, really good care and be really cautious with the spool. I probably won't be, using this to target largemouth bass. And, the Aldebaran's not really meant for power BFS anyways. It's coming in with a pretty low-ish drag rating. It's let's see, the number says 3.5 kilograms, so it's even lower than the Dark Wolf Ultra and all of those variants, which come in at about 4 kilograms. So, and then on top of that, you have micromodule gears, which micromodule gears basically means that you have more gear teeth on the main gear, and that's what makes the reel feel so smooth. But when you increase the gear teeth number, basically what you're doing is you're making each individual gear tooth a lot weaker than a traditional main gear. And so, this reel was not designed for power BFS. If you're using it out there for power BFS, then I hope you're servicing your reel and keeping it really well greased, and then using, very little drag when you're playing your fish, because the reel wasn't truly intended for that kind of purpose. At least that's what I feel. Okay, so there's a couple things that are interesting about this spool, and one is going to be about the ball bearing itself, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the spool tension shaft is actually made out of a material called PEEK, and that stands for polyether ether ketone. So polyether ether ketone, wow, that's a mouthful, is basically a thermoplastic polymer, and it doesn't really have a low coefficient of friction. So what you should do is, when you're using this, is to put a dab of a low viscosity oil at the end, so that when it does make contact with the spool, you're going to have a little bit of lubrication there to keep heat buildup down. You can see that the spool itself has a little bit of black coloration right here at the what should be the spool shaft. And then interestingly enough, it has a little bit of black anodization. I think that's anodization, essentially what the black is. It has some on this edge, but oddly not on this edge. I don't know if that's a manufacturing issue or just kind of like a quirk, but let's talk about the bearing itself. So I was able to kind of talk with the manufacturer and kind of pick their brain and ask them a little bit about the bearing. But the bearing on this particular spool is a hybrid microceramic. However, it is not using silicon carbide balls. It actually uses silicon nitride. And technically speaking, that's a little bit, they're a little inferior to SiC. I think SiC balls are harder. Okay, so here is the ball bearing itself. And the interesting thing is, when I first got this spool, I actually took off the ball bearing and I reinstalled it. But what I didn't know is that the ball bearing is directional on this spool. And I have never seen that before. I have never seen a ball bearing that is directional for installation. If you put the ball bearing on here in the incorrect orientation, it basically makes it so that the spool itself is pushed too far over towards the side plate, and it makes it so that this thing will not free spin at all. So if you've got it where you have that retaining clip, so if you can see here, let's see, if you see here, there's like a little tiny, what is it, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hexagonal retention clip in there. If you have that facing out away from the spool, then you know that you've installed it incorrectly. You want that retention clip to be facing towards the middle of the spool. And that'll allow the ball bearing itself to kind of sit further in towards the middle of the spool. But what I want to talk about is the size of the outer housing on this microceramic bearing. It's interesting because this is actually a 4 millimeter inner diameter by 8 millimeter outer diameter by virtually a 4 millimeter width. So as far as I know, there's no 484 ball bearings out there that are ceramic. So the interesting thing is that if you want to upgrade this ball bearing, you can. But what you have to do is you have to take out the bearing from this housing. And the way you do that is by taking out that retention clip. And so if you need something really, really skinny, and then just kind of jam it in between the clip and the housing itself, and kind of be careful with this, and then it'll just gently pop out. Keep your hand or your finger over the clip itself so that you don't lose it, and then store that somewhere safe. And then the ball bearing itself will just pop out of the housing. So you can see here that there's two pieces to that. And so this housing is what allows this microceramic ball bearing to kind of fit, and allowing the spool to fit into the reel itself. So you can kind of see it's still spinning, or no, it stopped. It doesn't spin for very long, and I think it's because it's a silicon nitride ball bearing. I've actually cleaned this out with acetone and then done alternating baths between acetone, 70% isopropyl alcohol, and then used some Simple Green Extreme aircraft cleaner, cleaned it out as much as possible, and it just doesn't seem to spin as long as those Roro SiC bearings. I mean, spinning time on bearings doesn't necessarily equate to better performance, but kind of in our application it does, because it's and I'll make another video talking about ball bearings specifically to fishing reels, but in our application there's not really a load on the spool when you're casting, and so you want bearings that spin as free as possible, essentially. Okay, So this size, if you're looking for the size to upgrade, is going to be a 4 inner diameter by 7 outer diameter by 2.5. Yeah, 2.5. Yeah, 2.5. So it's a 4 by 7 by 2. So the same exact size as the bushing. So just go ahead and pick up 2 of these if you're going to do this upgrade, essentially, or the spool and that. Anyways, so those are kind of the upgrades that the performance upgrades that you can do for your 2022 Shimano Aldebaran BFS. In the next video, I'm actually going to show you how to install this ball bearing into where the worm gear bushing goes. And let's see, what else can I say? Oh yeah, I did get some time on the water with this spool. I cast a 1 gram trout magnet. I want to say I got about 25 to 30 feet on an Ace Hawk CU double using the ultralight tip. It casts, 3 to 5 gram lures pretty consistently. Yeah, the only other difference between this and the stock spool is that it's a lot noisier. The stock spool is quieter, but I feel like with the stock spool, you kind of have to have like a certain technique down. And if you don't have that technique down, it kind of nips you in the butt. As soon as you start getting really overconfident with your casts, you get a backlash with the Aldebaran. But with this one, you can kind of huck it out there and not really pay too much attention to your casting technique, and then you'll still get pretty much the same distance. So I don't know why that is, but that's kind of my findings. I want to say that I've had a good experience with this spool. Anyways, that being said, I think that's going to pretty much do it for this video, guys. This video is already quite long. I do want to say thank you to all of you guys who have watched all the way through. And if you have got any questions, want to just talk to me, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section below. I answer each and every one of those comments. And with that being said, I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.